the All Things Strange podcast. We are your hosts, Agent Anderson and
Agent Ether.
Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Discord, our Patreon, our merchandise, and more. This week's episode, Strange Weapons of War.
Awesome.
All right, this is a really fun and goofy topic, and I'm glad that you guys voted on it. Before we get started, we've got two wonderful tiers of Patreon for you. The first tier, coming in at a measly $3, will get you early access, meaning that as soon as I finish the edit, it goes out on Patreon. No delay whatsoever. And bonus episodes, one episode a week. I've seen some podcasts that charge way more, and they only do one bonus episode a month. Slackers. Anyways, the next tier will get you, at $5, will get you the ability to vote on upcoming topics such as this one. All right, now let's get right to it, to the episode. Strange Weapons of War. Desperate situations demand creative solutions. In times of war, each side desperately searches for any advantage they can find. Even the smallest edge can make the difference between victory and defeat. But sometimes, this has led to some pretty unusual ideas. Come along this time for Strange Weapons of War. I guess I should have done that during the music or something. I don't know.
No, it's too long, but it was very well done. Did you write that?
I did. Thank you.
I like it. And you could say that these are innovative, but you could also say that they're just silly.
They are definitely both of those things. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to it. Would you like to go first, Agent Ether?
I would love to talk about my favorite.
All right.
Operation Acoustic Kitty.
Oh, yeah. This one's cool.
It is. It is. During the 1960s, the CIA used cats for surveillance, or at least that was the idea. They surgically implanted these poor kitties with microphones and transmitters, then they attempted to train them to go to specific locations on command. But cats, as you know, are little butts, and they kind of do, especially, what they want, compared to something like a dog. But a dog is more conspicuous than a little kitty cat. And unfortunately, in the first outing of said kitty cat, when they were trying to test this operation, it went to a park where there were two operatives on a bench and ran away across the street and was hit by a taxi.
So the only deployment was a complete failure.
Complete failure. Nothing good came of it. And shortly thereafter, Operation Acoustic Kitty was halted.
Implanting stuff in poor little kitties, doesn't that seem a little cruel to you?
Yeah, for sure. But, desperate times. That was during the Cold War, so...
Yeah, I gotta warn, actually, we should have warned them ahead of time. That one's actually not that bad, but...
Some of these are bad.
We're gonna get into some stuff that may be animal cruelty, so if you are squeamish or don't like animals being used as weapons or blown up, you may want to pause here.
Yeah, just skip this one.
Just skip
Go
this
to one of
episode.
the cryptid ones. Like, it's not our fault that people have decided that these were good ideas. We're just sharing these ideas with our general audience.
Yeah, we do not endorse any of these weapons.
No, definitely not. In fact, most of them are just plain dumb.
But they are silly, though, so that's what we're kind of doing. Strange. Or silly, I guess. All right, my turn?
Sure.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da, bat bomb.
Did you think of that too?
I wrote it out in my notes.
Really, with the whole little da-da-da-da.
Yeah, da-da-da-da, bat bomb.
I love it. Okay.
That's, sort of a Batman joke there. This seems like the sort of weapon that he would use, right? So we're at war with the Japanese. It's World War II. Things aren't going so great, and we need something to tip our scale in the favors. The perfect weapon of destruction to terrorize Tokyo? Bats.
Because,
Stuffed into bombs.
well, they are scary. They're like rats with wings. You've got those big giant bats we've talked about. Which ones are those? The fruit bats?
No, these were little tiny Mexican bats.
They're not big, giant, scary fruit bats.
Not at all.
Okay, so you take these little tiny bats and what do you do with them?
And also, we're talking about the Japanese Imperial Army here, the terror of Southeast Asia. Do you think they're going to be afraid of a couple of bats?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me more?
I will.
Okay.
So it sounds like a really stupid idea, bat bombs, but it's actually not quite as stupid as it sounds. The idea was cooked up around the same time as the Manhattan Project started, and at this time, fantasy was becoming reality and anything seemed possible. So they have, if you just look, we're only going to be able to cover so much during this episode, but there are so many completely bizarre weapons out there, and quite a lot of them originated during World War II.
Yeah, that was definitely a big time period.
Yeah. So the idea came about because the houses in Tokyo were mostly constructed out of wood, not concrete. And what sets wood on fire? That's right, bats.
Yes. Yes, they do.
Carrying incendiary devices.
Okay. Now we get to it.
Yeah. So this idea was the brainchild of, so who do you think the military goes to develop weapons? Generals, scientists, engineers?
One would hope any of those?
No, this one was devised by a dental surgeon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a dentist designing bat bombs. A dentist designing bat bombs. I am not making this up, I swear. Nope, nothing weird here, right? Pretty normal wartime activity type stuff. So the idea was inspired by a trip that Adams took to, did I say the guy's name?
Adams. Now you did.
No, I did, yeah. Lytle S. Adams was the name of the surgeon. So anyways, he took a trip to the Carlsbad Caverns National Park, which, as you guessed it, has bat caves. About a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the United States into the World War II, Adams wrote the White House with his idea. So he wasn't directly hired. He wrote a letter. And, that's kind of like what the physicists did for the atomic bomb. They just wrote a letter to the president. They're like, hey, you might want to pay attention to this because, they're trying to do it over there. So we might want to try to get his head start on them. Anyways, so he writes his letter to the White House with his idea of weaponizing bats. The idea centers around the fact that bats like to roost before dawn. So if you attached a time-delayed incendiary device to the bat, stuff a bunch of bats into a bomb-like delivery device, drop it on Tokyo at night, the bats should disperse and roost in various buildings around the city and light on fire in the morning and cause massive destruction. Well, President Roosevelt got the letter and consulted an expert from Harvard who said that yes, despite how ridiculous the idea was, it could actually work.
He's like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, well, Roosevelt's like, all right, I guess we're looking for any edge we can get. I'll ask somebody from Harvard. The guy from Harvard's like, actually, yes, this might actually work. A quote from Roosevelt, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into." So Adams was put in charge of the project, and I can't make all this stuff up. This is something that somebody needs to make a movie out of, I think, because the team of people he came up with were, no, not scientists and engineers and weapon builders, but he selected a mammologist, a former gangster, a filmmaker, and then a couple of other people like some scientists and an actor that starred in B movies. That's his team.
And go.
That sounds like a sitcom or something, right?
Yeah.
It's completely fantastic, completely wild. So there's others on the team, but those are, the most amusing ones. The project offered several challenges. For example, how would you transport a lot of bats? Any ideas? How would you transport them?
On a big, giant plane.
No, of course not. You would chill them in ice trays.
I mean, is this like cryogenically freezing them temporarily?
It wasn't specified, but that was their plan, is to chill them in ice trays, apparently, which is
Okay.
alrighty then. Which incendiary would they use?
Fireworks.
No.
Okay.
Why? What else other than napalm?
Okay.
And in fact, the inventor of napalm was on the Bat Bomb team.
Well, that's something at least.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that, but it is what it is. They determined the best way to deliver the napalm was to put it in a small container and glue that container on the front of the bat. The bat would then be placed in a 5-foot-long bomb-looking thing, dropped over enemy territory, and at 4,000 feet, a parachute would deploy, and the bats would be released to cause havoc. The bats were proven effectively, if only accidentally. Some of them escaped, roosted under some fuel tanks, and set the Carlsbad Army airfield on fire.
Oops.
But they worked. They worked great. They worked exactly like how they were supposed to. So the Army passed the project to the Navy because they're kind of like, I don't know about this. Let's give it to the Navy. Let them deal with it. The Navy's like, I don't know. Let's give it to the Marines. So they passed it on to the Marines. It's like a hot potato. Nobody wanted this thing. They built a fake Japanese village at the Dugway Proving Grounds.
That is one way to do it. Wow.
Yeah. Using the same materials they would expect to find in Japan, in Tokyo.
Was it full scale?
No, they didn't build a full-scale Tokyo in Dugway.
Because that would be
Proving Grounds.
awesome. And then do the whole thing, all the bats, 4,000 bats covered with napalm, and just go for it.
So they built I'm guessing it's just like a small village, some buildings, 10 buildings, something like that. I don't know. I think there's a picture online somewhere. But the tests were successful. Here's a quote. A reasonable number of fires can be started in spite of the extremely small size of the units. The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structures without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered. It was concluded that X-ray is an effective weapon. The chief chemist's report stated that, on a weight basis, X-ray was more effective than the standard incendiary bombs used at the time. Expressed in another way, the regular bombs would give probably 167 to 400 fires per bomb load, where X-ray would give 3,625 to 4,748 fires. So in other words, they tested this thing and it was apparently extremely effective. But the project was taking a long time to develop. I mean, that tends to happen when you're developing weapons using movie actors, mobsters, and whatever. I'm guessing the delay was due to something like that. And it was eventually canceled because of the development of the nuclear bomb made the bat bombs more or less obsolete. They spent a total of about $2 million on the project, or about $35 million in today's money, researching how to best use incendiary bats to burn buildings. After the project was canceled, Adams maintained that it would have worked and that it would have been better than the atomic bomb because it would have fewer negative side effects. So I have mixed feelings about this one. I think it's fascinating that, as ridiculous and stupid as it sounds on the face of it, it probably would have been a very effective weapon, but also, holy crap, man, do you have to torture animals? They tested this thing.
Yeah.
They burnt up bats to a crisp. This is insane. And the fact that bats escaped and roosted under a fuel tank, does that mean that they just glued napalm to bats and just kind of had them chilling in their cages for like whatever reason? I don't know. This is so weird. Such a bizarre thing. And, I don't know what to make of it, but it's one of these fascinating little tidbits of history that you can find if you read through some stuff.
If you weren't looking for it, though, here it is.
Yeah. Wild stuff. All right. That's what I have on bat bombs. What do you have next, Agent Ether?
I have a couple shorter ones.
Okay.
So I'll start with the Krumlauf. And this is indeed a German weapon. It was also developed during World War II. It translates to curved path because it's an attachment to a Sturmgewehr, or storm assault rifle, that was meant to be used, what for?
For fighting in the rain?
Shooting around corners.
I know.
Fighting in the rain. No, that was the name of the rifle, was the storm rifle.
Yeah, that's get it.
With a curved path attachment. So you screw on this attachment, you're out in the field, your enemies are on the corner, and you
Yeah.
shoot them and hit them. But that's not how it actually worked, because it was completely inaccurate and unreliable, not to mention just a pain to carry around, and apparently also quite heavy to attach to the rifle itself.
Now, the description doesn't do it justice.
No.
You have to look at a picture to see how just ridiculously stupid this thing looks. It looks like a rifle with a big, long bent barrel. It
Yes.
looks completely ridiculous.
And like it would never work anyways.
Yeah, you look at this thing and you think, that's a broken gun. That is not a weapon of war.
Like somebody bent that. Like
Yeah.
the Hulk went in and like bent it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it looks like. Just, when you see one of those superhero movies and the superhero, Superman or the Hulk, just grabs somebody's gun and just goes,
That's
Yeah.
what it looks like.
Yeah, hilarious.
Yeah.
In fact, I think wasn't there a scene in one of the Avengers movies where I think it is the Hulk, where somebody's trying to shoot him and he just grabs it and goes, but then the gun keeps shooting to the side and like shoots one of the other people or something. I don't know.
That if that wasn't in the movies, it should have been.
Yeah, it should have been. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but it definitely should have been a scene in that movie.
All right. We also have the Japanese Active Denial System, or ADS. It was developed primarily as crowd dispersal, but also maybe for guarding the perimeter. Guarding, let's say you have a bunch of soldiers and they're patrolling the perimeter. You can also have them patrolling with these mobile directed energy weapons. And it emits electromagnetic waves, like on the millimeter wave. So similar to a microwave, but it's directed. So it actually penetrates your skin, creating heat.
That sounds nasty.
It actually doesn't harm people. It's just kind of annoying. Like you want to get away from it because now you feel uncomfortable and hot.
Oh, I see. But it wouldn't actually like stop a battalion advancing.
Probably not. No, but it might disperse a crowd because it's like, this sucks.
Yeah. Okay.
Theoretically, you could also mount it on a vehicle and then you could adjust the intensity or the direction, but it allegedly has not been used in real life. It's just been tested.
They suspect that something like that may have been used in Cuba to cause the Havana syndrome. We've talked about the Havana syndrome before.
Yeah.
A little bit. In fact, I think during the Strange Noises episode, we had a recording of it on there.
That was a good episode.
That one was a lot of fun, man. That one, them strange noises. All right. You wanted me to move on here with another one?
I'll do one more short one.
Sure.
We also have the Kiss of Death.
Ooh.
Now, the Kiss of Death can actually refer to several smaller weapons that were invented by Russia for reasons of espionage or assassination that are small and compactable, but look like, relatively harmless objects.
Right.
However, this one refers specifically to a lipstick tube made for women that would fire one bullet. It could be reloaded, but probably wouldn't be. And it looks like lipstick. You can go online and look. It looks like a little tube of lipstick. Very inconspicuous.
That would be an effective way to conceal a weapon.
Mm-hmm. Or at least it would have been.
Yeah. Was it ever deployed?
Well, I don't know.
Possibly.
Who knows?
These spies are killing each other all the time.
All the time.
We don't know for sure.
What was the Spy versus Spy? Do you remember watching that cartoon?
Yeah, that was a Mad Magazine thing, wasn't it? And they had made a cartoon out of it.
Love it.
They also made a video game that was kind of fun because it was a 2-player game. I don't know if you could play against the computer. I don't remember. But you would basically just wander around a level and you would find different ways to kill the other player. So you'd have, I don't know, like a bucket of water with, electricity hooked up to it, and they'd open a door and then they would just get electrocuted to death or something.
I like it.
Just really bizarre stuff like that.
What platform was it on? Like Nintendo?
8-bit Nintendo, yeah.
Wow.
The NES.
Okay.
It was a pretty fun party game. You get to kill, you and your friends get to kill each other. It was pretty cool. Maybe a little rough around the edges, maybe not super replayable, but kind of a goofy, fun game. If you're into retro gaming, check it out. I wonder, actually, I want to see. Some of those 8-bit games are quite valuable. Some of them are not. So I just want to look it up real quick. Spy vs. Spy NES. Let's see. eBay. They're selling it for $19.99. So that's not too bad.
You too can own a copy of Spy vs. Spy, the video game.
Here's one that was free delivery. Here's $9.99 plus $5 delivery, whatever. So I'm seeing prices in the range of like $10 to $20. Here's a group of 5 games, including Spy vs. Spy, for $30. So it's actually not that bad. This is definitely obtainable.
I wonder if we have it on the emulator.
Yeah, I'm sure we do.
Got to play it with the kids, with Agent Egg and Agent Redacted.
Yeah. All right.
What's your next one, Agent Anderson?
Me next? All right, let's go. Now, let's say that it's World War II and you're having a little difficulty with tanks on the battlefield. Those tanks are pesky. Conventional weapons aren't super good at taking them out. They don't have guided missiles or anything like that yet, not really. And these things are a nuisance. They keep rolling over your soldiers and killing everybody. So how do you, if you're the Russians, how do you beat tanks?
With landmines?
Well, that's one idea, but no. They went with the anti-tank dogs.
Okay.
Anti-tank dogs. Again, I swear I'm not making this up. This was a real thing. So at first they wanted to train the dogs to leave the bomb under the tank and then run back so that, you could have a reusable dog. They're not that, they take some time and resources to train, so that makes sense. But they didn't really have much success with that. So instead, they opted to simply detonate the dog with the explosives. And the way they did this was quite simple. They rigged the dog up with explosives, and they had kind of like a little stick coming off of its back. And when the dog would crawl under the tank, it would push the stick back, triggering the explosives. Boom, blowing up the tank from underneath. They conducted a test on the front lines. 30 dogs were sent armed with bombs. Only 4 detonated near the tanks. The damage done was unknown. 6 got scared and came back to the Soviet trenches, blowing up and injuring or killing Soviet forces. So they actually got more of the dogs got scared, because it's a battlefield. You got like guns going off and all kinds of scary stuff. So the dogs got scared, came back and blew up the Soviets. Serves them right for blowing up dogs, if you ask me.
Yeah.
The rest of the dogs were shot by the Germans or by the Soviets to prevent them from returning with the explosives. So this is just awful. Absolutely horrible. This was not a successful weapon at this point. The Germans made fun of the Soviets, saying that they were too afraid to fight, so they sent their dogs instead. It's not really clear. We don't have exact records how many dogs were deployed and how many were successful, but they were used on the battlefield occasionally. That there were some amount of them were used. Probably dozens of tanks were disabled by dogs. They continued to train anti-tank dogs in Russia until, when do you think they stopped?
The end of the war.
World War II?
Yes.
Oh no, you are far too optimistic with that one.
Why?
They continued to train anti-tank dogs in Russia until 1996.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess they must have been at least somewhat effective if they continued to train them until 96. That is pretty crazy.
They worried about the tanks rolling in or what? Training dogs till 96?
I don't know. I guess so. The Cold War was pretty nasty with constant wars, proxy wars all over the place.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, I guess. The United States also had a similar program, but they trained dogs to enter bunkers, but it was not successful and the dogs were never used in combat, at least as far as I can find. Although, knowing the military, they probably did detonate a few dogs just to test it out, on some mock bunkers. Oh, geez. Isn't this horrible?
I want to talk about mine instead.
This is absolutely horrible. All right, what do you have?
I have a bouncing bomb.
Oh, a bouncing bomb.
Bouncing bomb. It's meant to be dropped into the water where it would bounce along until either it found a submarine to sink or it could be used to bounce over objects to get to targets like dams.
So you would drop this from altitude?
Yeah, so you would have this cylindrical-shaped spinning mechanism that allowed it to stay on top of the water, and there was a delayed fuse that detonated on impact, but you had to be pretty low in altitude.
Oh, I see.
And then you would drop it from the plane, and then it would go bounce, 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 explode.
Weird.
It was invented by Barnes Wallis. He was an engineer in Britain, so this was a British operation. And it was deployed in Operation Chastis in 1963. It was carried out by the Royal Air Force, and it was meant to be an operation in the Ruhr Valley to destroy two dams, the Monet Dam and the Eder Dam. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Mohne. Moan
That sounds close enough.
Dam and the Eder Dam. So two dams. And hopefully that would cause substantial flooding and hurt their military-industrial complex, which depended on that water supply and hydroelectric power.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a specific squadron they formed to carry out the mission. They used 19 modified Lancaster bombers. It was bad weather, and they had to fly low to avoid radar detection, so it was a pretty difficult mission. One of the dams was breached as planned, but the other dam, the Eder Dam, only sustained minor damage, and half the crew perished or were captured. And so it wasn't considered super successful, and since the mission was so difficult and the Germans were back up and running within a few weeks, it wasn't deployed again.
But it was surprisingly somewhat successful.
It was.
Yeah.
It was successful.
Wow. Okay.
We're going to blow up your dam.
With a bouncing bomb.
That's right.
That's cool.
Let's see. Did you want to go next? I've got two more.
I have two more as well, so that works out. All right, I'll go up next. Well, during World War II, Britain or England, I'm not sure which is which, but, England was a little jelly of its allies coming up with all these animal-based weapons.
Jeez.
So they decided to cook up a little animal-based weapon of their own. They didn't use bats. They did not use dogs. What would you guess they used?
Well, we already talked about cats. Let's see. How about rats?
Yes, indeed. They use rats as weapons.
I feel intelligent.
AKA the rat bomb. So they took a bunch of dead rats, stuffed them full of plastic explosives, and the plan was to distribute them near German areas, cities, camps, whatever. The Germans would then take the dead rats, whoever was in charge of cleaning up the streets or whatever, they would scoop up the rats and toss them in the incinerator to burn them up, because you can't have a bunch of dead rats around. That spreads nastiness, So that was the plan. And then once the explosives goes into the incinerator, kaboom, causing damage to their boilers, which is actually a somewhat important piece of infrastructure, right? Unfortunately, the Germans intercepted the first batch that was sent in. However, this was a really good distraction because the Germans wasted a lot of resources looking for explosive rats that didn't exist.
Oh my goodness.
So for the British, this probably caused more damage than if the rats had been successful, because they got the very first shipment, but they assumed, because they got one shipment, they assumed that there were probably more that they didn't get yet, and they were, in perpetual fear of burning rats in their incinerators or just dead rats in general, I guess.
You're walking around the street, you're like running away in terror.
Ah, Scheiße! How do you say rat in German? Ein toter Ratte! All right, so that's the dead rats I have for you.
Excellent. I have Project Habakkuk, and that's one of my other favorites.
All right.
In World War II, there was this British plan to create an aircraft carrier made out of ice.
Oh, right. I've heard of this one.
It would be 86% ice and 14% sawdust, and they called the material pykrete.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. We're just going to make our own material and we're going to give it a name. I was like, I love it.
Yeah. Wasn't it named after the guy who came up with the idea in the first place or something?
Yeah. So it doesn't melt as fast as ice, and they thought it would be strong enough to be a floating structure. At the time, it would have been one of the largest aircraft carriers ever to be designed at 2,000 feet.
That's a big aircraft carrier.
It is. And it would have to have, of course, all the same facilities as a regular aircraft carrier. So crew and bunkers and places for, the planes to hang out. But only a prototype was made because realistically, you have to think about balancing your refrigeration with, heat for your crew so they don't freeze to death.
Right.
As well as like defensive measures. Like, is that hull really going to survive a submarine?
How are you going to sleep?
You're going to be very, very cold. Well, you could do some like insulation on the inside so that the aircraft carrier itself stayed cold, but then like it's insulated and there's like warm air, but then you have to worry about oxygen levels and stuff.
Yeah.
That's like, it's not good. It's just not good. So it got scrapped. The project got scrapped.
Interesting idea, though. I mean, maybe cheaper to construct than a steel one. But my main problem is that how are you going to go to the bathroom? Everybody would be able to see you. That'd be extremely awkward.
It would have to have facilities too. Like, how do we even deal with that?
Yeah.
And then deploying the damn ship, because it was supposed to go up more north, towards the Antarctic.
Yeah.
And like, how are you going to get it there? Are you going to construct it up there? You think the Germans and Russia, you think they're going to let you just go up there and construct this big icecraft carrier? Like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Really weird idea.
Yeah.
Very, very strange. Should I get to my next one?
Yeah, and then I have one more after that.
Sounds good. Okay, Agent Ether, how would you guide a bomb to its target before modern guidance systems? You don't have GPS.
You don't have animals in this one, I hope.
You don't have laser pointers. No, you can't use any of that stuff.
Okay, thank goodness. No animals.
Well, no. You can't use GPS or laser pointers. They haven't been invented yet.
Does it involve animals?
Well, any sensible person looking to guide a bomb or missile would, of course, use pigeons.
Oh, see, I knew it. I knew it was more animals.
Pigeons are really good at flying places. That's what they do.
They fly.
They fly,
and
yeah.
There's lots of them.
They're great at it. So why not stick them in a bomb to help the bomb fly to its destination? I'm guessing this is what the pitch was. And I'm also guessing whoever was receiving this pitch was really high on something. So this idea was cooked up by behaviorist B.F. Skinner. And I think I talked about this one. We did an episode on the ignobles. That might have been a bonus episode. I don't remember. But I'm pretty sure I talked about this one briefly on that. But yeah, this was behaviorist B.F. Skinner came up with the idea to train pigeons to pilot or guide bombs. So here's a quote about the guidance system, because this is it's really wild. So I had trouble putting it in my own words. So here's a quote. The guidance system consisted of 3 lenses mounted in the nose of the vehicle, which projected an image of the target on a screen mounted in a small compartment inside the nose cone. This screen was mounted on pivots and fitted with sensors that measured any angular movement. 1 to 3 pigeons, trained by operant conditioning to recognize the target, were then stationed in front of the screen. When they saw the target, they would peck at the screen with their beaks. They were trained by being shown an image of the target, and gradually more and more rapid pecks were required for a grain of food. One bird pecked more than 10,000 times in 45 minutes. As long as the target remained in the center of the screen would not move. But if the bomb began to go off track, the image would move towards the edge of the screen. The pigeons would follow the image, pecking at it, which would move the screen on its pivots. So somehow they were able to, Flintstones their way into getting a bird to guide a bomb.
That is incredible.
It's absolutely insane. Like, if you're going to put this amount of engineering into something, couldn't they have come up with something that didn't involve torturing animals? You know, B.F. Skinner, who had some success with the training, complained. He said, "Our problem was no one would take us seriously." You
Good.
don't say. But once again, we have this wild idea that might have actually worked. It sounds like it would have actually worked, although it was never deployed. The program was canceled on October 8th, 1944, and Skinner won his Ig Nobel Award for this in 2024. It was accepted, I think, by his daughter, who accepted it in good humor. You know, because how could you not? It's such a goofy idea, right? All right, Agent Ether, you got one more for us?
I do. I found this interesting. This is the last one I have. And there was a raid back in 2011, so not too long ago. And it was in South Korea. And they were looking for North Korean operatives. And they found a cache of weapons, including a flashlight. But this was no ordinary flashlight because it was actually a gun. So like the lipstick tube, it was some sort of kiss of death device that was meant to fire a single bullet. There was also a flashlight. In addition to the flashlight gun, there was a ballpoint pen weapon that was designed to look like a writing instrument, but it was not a gun, but it had like poison in it.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. So both of these weapons, you know, were definitely for assassination.
Right. That's not something you're going to use for the battlefield.
No, definitely not.
That's more to like smuggle in and then, you know, use it on somebody while they're least suspecting it.
So not per se a weapon of war, but definitely a weapon of, what would you say, espionage?
Espionage, yeah. Which is war adjacent, you know.
I like espionage better. Less casualties.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it to keep it to yourselves. I don't want to be involved.
Yeah, and there seems to be a lot less animals being tortured when it comes to espionage. Not zero. The number is definitely more than zero, but apparently less. And is that what you had for that one?
That's what I got.
And there's actually some other espionage things I read about that I didn't take notes on. For instance, there's an umbrella that they rigged up to be an air pellet rifle, and they had a little BB in there with poison in it, and they actually used this to assassinate somebody. Just an umbrella. They're just walking by, and they just go, bink, hit you with a little BB, and you might not even notice it that much.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's not like getting shot with a bullet. You're going to probably say, ow, that really hurt, but it probably doesn't even really go into your skin. It just needs to like break your skin a little bit to get the poison in you, and then you die.
I thought I read something about a weapon that felt like a bee sting that was very similar. It was actually poison and it killed you.
Yeah, that's what they said. This one felt like a bee sting.
Bee sting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's a BB, but it felt like a bee sting.
There might be another one as well, but that's the one I read about as far as that goes. But yeah, there's a ton of goofy weapons that we didn't talk about. There's one, it's a gun and a knife and brass knuckles.
I saw that one.
Yeah.
So
there's various pistols that have like 20 barrels. They look absolutely silly. I don't know. There's so many of these things. There's like a tricycle tank that has big, giant 30-foot tall tricycle wheels. I don't know. There's so many of these bizarre weapons of war that we could definitely do multiple parts to this. But if you find this stuff interesting at all, give it a quick Google. There's all kinds of crazy ones. I just sort of chose some of my favorite ones. And it's also not, I wouldn't say favorite necessarily, but it's also like the ones involving animals are just so awful to me because, you know, they tortured animals to develop these weapons, and they're also completely ridiculous because a gun with 20 barrels, it's still got 20 barrels. It kind of looks cool and it shoots bullets. So it's not that silly, but you know, guiding a missile with pigeons, that's completely ridiculous.
you also have a lot of weapons that were like thought experiments.
Right.
That were never funded, but maybe somebody had this idea and blueprints were drawn up or something was designed or it got through a certain phase and then kind of fizzled out. There was, for example, the Soviet flying submarine.
Yeah, I saw that one. I saw that.
One can try.
There's also a flying tank, which is like a tank with wings.
I'm like, why would that's called an airplane? Just use the airplane and be happy.
Picture a World War II tank with like some biplane wings on it. That was the plane. That was it. The flying tank. That was what it looked like. I don't think it was ever really deployed. I think it was just sort of like an idea.
I also saw guns that fire different kinds of bullets, like triangular bullets, square bullets. I'm like, oh, why? Why?
Yeah. So many ridiculous ideas out there. It's hard to know which ones to include, but there's so many goofy ones out there. It was quite a lot of fun to do the reading for this episode.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Well, I think that's pretty much all we got for you this time. Any final thoughts, Agent Ether?
I just think that the world just keeps on turning and getting more ridiculous.
Yep, it gets more ridiculous by the day sometimes.
This feels very Monty Pythonish to me, though, because you have the holy hand grenade.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when you mentioned weapons of warfare. That is the first thing that popped into my head, followed by the rabbit.
Yeah.
On the same movie. We should definitely be deploying rabbits.
That rabbit's dynamite.
Yeah, we're big Monty Python nerds over here.
Yeah.
So.
Although, maybe we'll talk about it in the after hours.
Yeah.
But all right. Anyways, thank you everybody so much for listening, and until next time,
keep it strange.